Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another stunning and brave episode of Human Reaction. We are so glad that you're here at your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics, where, as you know, if you're a regular watcher or listener of this show, it's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono narrative. We've got a great docket of news to talk about today. David, what is on the docket?
So the first up is Joe Biden sleeps with the first man of France.
You're going to have to explain that.
Yeah, well, we'll get there. You'll see. You'll see. It's a long burn. Dave Smith whips Chris Cuomo in a debate on COVID-19 policy, just as Anthony Fauci is brought in for questioning on how he invented the virus. Mexico elects a climate scientist as president, solving Mexico's biggest problem.
Poverty.
Weather.
Oh.
Yeah.
Close.
Right. Bukele talks to Carlson about melting commies and fighting Satanists. And join us in the skiff for more. We got Senator Kennedy corners the FBI on the Epstein investigation and a lot of other stuff.
And we're also going to talk about people getting kidnapped for the draft.
Yeah. Perhaps
exciting.
your kids or just Ukrainians. We'll see.
We should say our editor and esteemed producer Bennett is not with us today. So if anybody goes out of focus, you can blame him. He's gallivanting around Northern Europe right now.
Actually, that happened when he was here last time, remember?
Well, that's true. So you can blame him for that as well. Thanks a lot, Bennett. Appreciate
And if
it.
anything goes wrong with the edit,
Blame Kyle.
we'll also blame him.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not here.
Exactly. He cannot defend himself, so he is victim number one. All right. Before we get into the show, please do like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. Anywhere else you're listening around the internet, please do leave us a review. It means the world to us. Thank you so much to our members who have supported us financially. Thank you to all of you who are watching and who are subscribed. We just reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we're super excited. If you would like to join us and support the show financially and become a member and get access to the Skiff, which is not only a members-only show on YouTube and on Substack, we also have a private Discord channel just for paying members. It gets very spicy in there. We would love to have you. Kyle, what's the meme of the week?
It does get very spicy in here. And we also have dank memes in there.
We do.
And our meme this week from the Discord comes from Cheryl, who says, "Mom, I'm scared. I don't want to go to war. Honey, quit being selfish. I don't like the president of Russia."
Quit being selfish.
Which is relevant to what we're going to be talking about in the Skiff episode this week. Too,
Indeed it is. All right, to our first story, Mr. Rand.
Well, Biden went to a D-Day celebration in France, and it's just a highlight reel of gaffes. So here's one that did hit pretty big. Was I don't know. You tell me what's going on here.
Yeah. So we got Taps is playing in the background, and Biden is.
Macron just looking very, very confused.
Okay, I guess we'll look at this one.
So Biden turns around and then everyone is like, "Oh, guess we should do that too." And so now they're all facing away for whatever reason.
And I'll be clear. Like there was so many different gaffes to choose from for this episode, and I just went with two.
Yeah.
There was
like
6. Yeah, that I was easily just selected between. And the next one here is But Biden's just not looking good. He's just not looking good.
Gets the handshake.
And
distinguished guests,
please
welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense of the United States.
Okay, this is important context. So for those of you that aren't watching this, right, there's this clip that went around that fooled me, I'll say that, where it looks like Biden is shitting himself on stage.
Yeah.
The clip was very darkened, so that chair in the background, it looked like an invisible chair.
You can't see it. Yeah. And it's cut short, so you don't actually see him ultimately sit down in the chair, which you can't see in that clip.
He does get escorted out by his wife after this, so there might be something there that exists, but he gets escorted out. I don't know. A lot of people are speculating that
he had some sort of episode. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that clip really, and you pointed out, David, perfect example of deceptive editing. One of the things that we're trying to do here is cut through the media misdirection.
Edit things.
Yeah.
And that. It's not often we come to President Biden's aid or defense in this regard, but in this case, he was sort of framed in a very unfavorable light, and a rumor did spread that was not true.
But after this, while the speeches were going on, Biden did fall asleep in his chair. There was a video of that too. I didn't pull that one, and that's kind of what David was referencing
too. Like he's literally just there, and he's just like,
His eyes are just like going.
Everyone else is awake. They're looking into the sun, and his eyes are just closed, and he's just totally.
Maybe it was just
zonked.
bright out. Okay.
Yeah, I know, but even then, it's still kind of disrespectful, right? Like in the moment, like you're at the D-Day thing, and you're like just.
Well, and this is not the only. This is not the only time that Biden has been seen to have fallen asleep.
He fell asleep at the freaking fires thing. Remember?
Well, yes, and he also fell asleep at a ceremony for some military officers in the U.S. I believe. I don't recall if it was a funeral. It was a somber event, and the dude just kind of took a nap in the middle of it. But dude, he's 80 what? 86. 4 somewhere.
Yeah, it's like low
4 more years.
He's got 4 more.
I don't know that he has 4.
Someone's like, I'm riding with Biden. This guy's inspiring and making me energetic.
Biden's not riding with Biden.
He makes all of us look energetic on our very worst days. That's for sure. What do we got next?
So that's just kind of, that happened yesterday.
Oh, we're just going to watch the 2.
But I'm not going to go through all the gaffes.
If
you've been on the internet, you've seen the gaffes.
Okay.
But
and no one's
it's
surprised.
worth mentioning that those happened.
No one's surprised that Joe Biden is a geriatric president who's a gaff factory, right? So it's just kind of at some point we're just elder abuse. But that said, I'd love.
But he's the president of the United States.
No, he isn't. He's the guy that they trot out because he was Obama's running mate to maintain the power of certain set of staff members.
The president of the United States is actually 3 staffer raccoons in a trench coat that are just running the show behind Biden and like holding his arms up to do things.
It's a very Weekend at Bernie's type
keeping his eyes open.
Well, that's the thing is like people will be like, oh, don't be mean to Biden, right? And it's just like, he's the president of the United States. Like, fair game. To be able to be like, I think he should be able to stay awake through an important, memorial service.
It's a very fair ask.
Fair ask.
Yeah.
I think it shouldn't be in question if he shot himself on stage. Right?
It's true. We should not be asking ourselves this question. That should not be a rumor to be able to go around because that should never happen.
You should never take that long to sit down. If I took that long to sit down, you'd be like, are you okay?
Are you having a stroke?
And I'd be like, no, it's the drugs. Like they'd be like, oh, I understand now.
You think they just gave him the wrong drug cocktail? They like mixed the laxatives into his methamphetamines by accident.
Oops.
Not enough uppers.
Poured the wrong concoction this time.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com.
Yeah. So anyways, moving on. It's COVID reconciliation week, I think. I think a lot of people generally more on our side of the camp in the COVID lockdown era. We had a good week, all right?
It was a good week.
Two major stories that happened. One, and we'll get to this one, was Dave Smith versus Chris Cuomo, which kind of broke the internet in a lot of ways. A big debate, very fun debate to watch.
Quite true.
But first we'll get into Fauci in Congress, because there's been this cover-up story that's happened with emails and FOIA requests. And first we'll have Rand Paul here talking about that, and it'll kind of tee up what's going on here.
I think they knew early on they had funded the bulk of this research in Wuhan, and that if the lab leak were correct or there was any kind of suggestion that this came from the lab, it would also link to them, that there would be culpability, moral culpability, fiscal responsibility for having funded this dangerous research. And they knew this in the very beginning. We know that there were emails sent to Anthony Fauci. We got these under Freedom of Information Act. And in these emails, the first emails arriving on his desk in late January 2020 were saying, here's the research we're funding in Wuhan. It's gain of function. We're not sure how it got passed since it never went before the safety committee. That was one of the first emails he ever received. So he knew from the get-go he had funded it. His own staff was calling it gain of function, and he knew it had never gone before the safety committee. That one email alone should be enough to indict him in the annals of history and to be reviled for generations as having made a terrible, terrible mistake to fund this research, but then also to spend months covering it up, only to come back yesterday or the day before and say, oh, I was always open-minded. What hogwash. He was never open-minded, and he literally orchestrated a cover-up of any connection of him and his money and NIH to that lab. It absolutely, without question, was a cover-up.
And what's interesting here is, he got caught on in committee this week and basically saying, hey, you're the one who suppressed the lab leak theory. And he says, no, I was always open-minded to it.
Right.
It's just such bullshit. And I'm so glad Rand Paul was calling him out on it.
Well, it's important too, because what else was kind of found out in this was the top NIH advisor, Dr. David Morenz, deleted records concerning the origins of COVID, and he was conducting like official business on his private Gmail account. And he said, quote, I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. He wrote this in February 24th, 2021. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail. It's very like Hillary Clinton email scandal,
very much,
right? It reminds me of that type of.
We've talked about this a lot, but we do know, and we had one of our videos that did pretty well was on the DARPA proposal that got leaked out of that we know also went to the National Institute of Health. So NIH gives out money to EcoHealth Alliance that then supports probably the Wuhan Institute of Virology's development of these viruses in order to protect the next virus so you can develop a vaccine before the virus even comes out. That's supposedly the project, and they knew that all the way back in January of that year, but they still tried to spike the story and say anyone who said otherwise was a racist. That's that's the thing that just keeps coming around too much too. Additionally, with Rand Paul's kind of constantly like pulling on this, we know that it's it obviously got in their heads. Because they just can't. They are obviously trying to get around with it with Gmail accounts and Hillary Clintonizing it, I guess.
And it's funny. Rand Paul tweeted this out. Oops, is this amplifying it too much? And what he tweets out is an email where it says, this should go away if Rand Paul doesn't amplify it too much.
So fingers crossed on that.
Well, it is funny in those emails they very specifically point out at Rand Paul because he was
from the beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning he was the guy that was really hitting them hard on this and trying to dig all these things up from within the Senate.
And if there's any justice at all who'll be president in 2028 because of it, but that's probably not going to happen. We're gonna be like, what's COVID by then?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, and that strikes to an interesting point, right? Of like, okay, so all of this, to those of us that have been paying attention and those of us that have been watching these hearings that Fauci has now been in a few times, nothing is happening, right? And there's sort of this like joke on the internet that like all we need from the Republicans is another sternly worded letter. All we need is to drag Fauci in front of Congress one more time, and then maybe something will get done. Well, nothing's been getting done.
All they really can do is like the investigatory work, though. Like these committees, that's kind of their purpose is to do that. They don't really have much power beyond.
Can't
that.
they can also recommend for charges to be filed by DOJ, but obviously we know that DOJ has no interest in doing that.
Well, and they're not going to do that because the Democrats continue to just deny reality with this stuff. I mean, we have 40% of the population is still in complete denial about what happened in 2020, right? Just like they are in denial about 2016. You're asking a whole whole set of the population, like, yeah, obviously Russia stole the election in 2016, but the election in 2020 was totally fine. Like all these things, there's an entire demographic that just isn't dealing with it. And this video is a great example. We have Senator Garcia.
Mr. Garcia, but he's giving Fauci the platform to kind of air his grievances about how many people died here. Here we go.
Listen to America's brightest and best doctors and scientists, or instead listen to podcasters, conspiracy theorists, and unhinged Facebook memes?
Listening to people who you just described is going to do nothing but harm people because they will deprive themselves of life-saving interventions, which has happened. And some have done studies. Peter Hotez has done an analysis of this and shows that in people who refuse to get vaccinated for any variety of reasons, probably responsible for an additional 200,000 to 300,000 deaths in this country.
Thank you, sir, and your entire team for saving lives in this country. And I'm sorry.
See, that's damage control, right? Isn't that not damage control?
Podcasters and memes are responsible for 200,000 to 300,000 people being killed. That's what he's saying.
Said by the dude who funded the institution that created the virus, probably.
and by the dude whose organization and related scientists made what, 700 something million dollars on royalties from the vaccines that were released as a result of the virus that he funded the research to produce.
Yes,
So stop noticing, Joe.
One of the crazy things about this, and this gets into that Glenn Greenwald Rand Paul interview that's very interesting, is the degree to which we found out of the circular money machine that is the scientific epidemiology community. That, you know, the reason why Fauci is as popular is because he gets into the positions of power to then hand out the money. So if you are skeptical, right, if you're saying this cleavage site looks skeptical, Mr. Fauci, he says like, well, don't mention that. In fact, I want you to do the opposite. I want you to tell everybody it's not that. And then just so coincidentally, you're going to get $8 million for that project that you want.
Wink,
right?
wink.
Because he's handing out the money, right? If he's the guy with the money, everyone's going to just say, well, I'm going to say what needs to be done. Not only to protect my profession, right? Because these are all the guys who said the EcoHealth Alliance was doing a legit mission that makes total sense, right? Even though the mission makes no sense when you think about it.
Completely.
And then second, you know, like their brand is how they make their money and how they get all their prestige as epidemiologists. And then, you know, this guy's the guy with the checkbook.
Totally.
And it's your money. That's the crazy thing. It's tax dollar money. It's not like he's just rich and handing it out. This is like, he's using our money to do this.
And it's also taxpayer money that funded the vaccines that then got funneled right back to him in the form of all these royalties.
Right.
And not just him, but like the broader organization. And this is a broader problem across all of science. People that think science isn't captured by funding mechanisms that are just going to, by basic incentives, push and funnel money towards interests that are aligned with their own, with the NIH, the CDC. People that don't see that as like a real problem within the scientific community are deluded. They're just not paying attention. Of course, if you're opposed to the narrative, the people that control the narratives and control the money are not going to give you the money to do the research.
Right.
Yep.
And that's just, and you look at that at climate change, right? I don't know if you remember this, but back in like 2009? It was right around, 9 or 10. We had the Russian email link of all the climate scientists. Yeah, Russian actor, we don't know who, hacked into all these, you know, climate scientists' emails and, you know, collaborative accounts and released all their private emails going back and forth each other across the university system, using, you know, money and using clout to box out anyone who questioned the climate science and, you know, basically played exactly the same game that Fauci's playing here, just in the climate science area to carry a narrative. Because the whole goal is not to just discover truth and reveal that to the public. It's actually it's politics built into it because it's publicly funded.
And is that why all of the Democrats lined up in support of Fauci and all the Republicans lined up against him?
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? I mean, because also most people with PhDs are leaning to the left, democratically, right? Policy-wise.
Interestingly, though, there was that stat during COVID that people with PhDs were the least likely to get the vaccine.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I wonder if they know something.
But they overwhelmingly vote Democrat.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Because they're so smart.
Well,
obviously.
Yeah, right. That's because what was it? The OMG thing this week is like facts are left leaning or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably worth noticing that you're starting to see articles like this coming out too from the Telegraph. The COVID vaccine may have helped fuel a rise in excess deaths, right? Like,
yeah.
It's just everything around what the science is changing. Like, I think that's what I'm trying to make clear here.
And
the science is changing.
There was the other study that was also recently released out of England that broke apart the claim that myocarditis and pericarditis were equally caused by the natural infection of COVID and the COVID vaccine. They blew that apart, substantiating a study in kids that showed that basically 100% of the cases of myocarditis and pericarditis came exclusively from the vaccine, not from natural infection.
And you're giving a kid myocarditis.
Yeah. And so many worse things. I mean, I know more people now with weird like heart conditions or pulmonary embolisms or, I mean, strokes. Like it's starting to crop up in people my age, 30s, 40s.
Well, you're pretty old, Joe. So
I am pretty old. So
Boomer
it could happen.
over here.
It could happen at any time, guys. Just watch out. If I go down, well, you can't blame the vaccine.
let us
that's
know
for
if
sure.
you smell toast. But yeah.
If I try to sit down in a chair that isn't there, maybe get worried.
All of a sudden, your brain just starts going, and you're just like,
Oh, turn the whole world into Biden.
Joe's getting dizzy on the podcast right now.
That's how the
Yeah,
Chinese
yeah.
win right there.
So I got one more clip from the hearing, and this is Fauci here talking about, this was leaked audio that was played of him in the congressional halls here.
And protected legally, you were going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
That's exactly what you meant when you said making it hard for people to live.
And that is called nudge.
Yeah. It's all Pavlovian signaling, right?
Well,
True.
So Cass Sunstein wrote this book called Nudge, right? That got really popular amongst progressive circles in the 90s and 2000s. He actually joined the Obama administration as, I can't remember exactly what his role is, but the important thing to understand about that is this idea that incentives matter, right? They're basically just, economics, right? If you create all the incentives, you don't have to make hard rules. You just got to get creative about your incentives, and you empower government to basically do anything, but then use that power to make small incentives change, then you get a better society.
Right.
The problem with that is what happened with COVID, right? You get, religious fervor around these things. You get moral panics around these things that prioritize first the power and prestige of government, the narrative that the elite want, not, the facts, not the truth, not the reality. And you just can't know what the implications of your nudges are going to be.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I think this very subject is why myself and so many other libertarians are completely opposed to the LP presidential nominee Chase Oliver's position on employer vaccination. He supported that, and that's, publicly, that's out there. It's not fair to say that that's a free market mechanism for an employer to say, you have to get vaccinated or we're going to fire you. That to me is coercion, right? Like, yeah, you could go to another company and you could say, oh, okay, the company's a private company. They have the right to do what they want. But is that really the spirit of the situation? Is that really freedom for that employee to make their own medical decisions? I say no.
Well, that's the thing, because like in a purely free market situation and like a libertarian utopia, there wouldn't be this mass hysteria propaganda campaign that is kind of dictating the information that businesses are using to make their decision making. So this all becomes very, like, in isolation. I agree with the libertarian position on that, right? But it's the problem is we don't live in that society right now. Like, that's not the game that we're currently in, where that freedom of association, it's like, it's very muddy, it's very complicated because of the nature of this whole system that we exist with.
Right. And we understand from a video clip like this that there is deep collusion between companies and the government to push these narratives on people. This isn't an organic thing where one company is saying, we've looked at the science, we think it's a good idea, and so we're gonna suggest or mandate that our employees all get it. This is a top-down thing that is across so many industries, enormous companies, and if you're looking at millions, tens of millions of American employees facing these things from large employers, which they all were, that is not organic. That's not right.
There's also an interesting kind of intangible there.
Yeah.
From the 1910s to the 1960s, there's like this huge monopolization of science by the government. It used to be, before the progressive era, that largely science was funded by the private sector. When you monopolize something, then you could do narrative control more easily, and you're less likely to have actual science, which is a debate between competing interests to understand what's actually going on. So we monopolized it, and then we're kind of treating it as if we were in the situation that we ideally would be in.
Yeah.
And we're not in that ideal situation. We're not even close to that. We're not even close to our vision of how scientific knowledge would be generated out of competing interests that are interested in releasing all their information. We don't even have a lot of the fundamental data that these claims about the vaccines were actually safe or effective or any of these things. And then we don't have any of the legal liability that would also go with it, right? If your business forced you to get a vaccine that would injure you, in a sensible world, that would be cause for injury claims, right? But we took all that away. We said, no, because we have, and the argument to take that away is a sensible argument. If you're going to regulate it, you can't also have cause of action against the regulations that you're going to make, right? If you're going to say we're going to have public health policy, but then if it doesn't work out, the people who implemented that public health policy by following the rules are liable. Not the government's not liable, but they are. That's crazy. Like you put a business in a catch-22.
It's true,
right? So the whole arrangement has been dictated by the progressives and the progressive eras. And when I think about nudge, that's progressivism. right? So rather than focusing on progressivism and them as the enemy, we're instead focusing on whether the business is the enemy or the government's the enemy. Like that idea needs to die. And that's the real challenge. And that means taking away all this money out of the National Institute of Health, taking all the authority for the FDA to control all the science in this area, and instead, move that into a more diversely funded, more interests, like where people can fund it according to their actual values, not according to the values of someone like Fauci who can just command tax dollars because, I don't know what he's done to do that. Yeah. Suck enough dicks to make that happen. I don't know what he's doing to do it, but like for some reason, everyone looks to this guy to do it. So why? Probably because he's a simp. Probably he's the guy who's best at the cocktail parties, making everybody feel good. That's not qualification. That's not a reason for that person to have that kind of power. Not in a sensible way.
Certainly not. Well, and I thought, this goes directly to, a really cool clip that we have from a guy, James Lindsay, who appeared in Brussels, talking about this very thing, right? Like, we want it to be about science, about discovery, about questioning, about real truth and facts, but his assertion is that it's not. And obviously, I think that's the case that we're all making here.
I think you're referencing this tweet, right?
Well, there was a video clip that we had, or that I had seen, but we don't have it.
I didn't have that in the notes, but
this is a New York Times Magazine tweet that says, continuing to penalize unvaccinated athletes like Irving and
Novak Djokovic
makes little sense, even if it feels good. Even if it feels good is the really important way to think about that.
Unfortunately, it's time to let Kyrie Irving play in NYC.
Unfortunately.
Right? And notice the words, like he has it underlined. And James Lindsay, in my opinion, is one of the best people at kind of deciphering propaganda. It's kind of what he's become very good at, and kind of determining, what the narratives are. He's very good. Worth the follow on kind of deciphering propaganda in this way. But I think that's it is like.
But no, this is very much a moral panic. You can tell by the language that they use. Penalize. It feels good. It makes little sense. Like those sorts of things are very much in that. So we also have this week for our COVID reconciliation week, Dave Smith savagely beating a man to death.
Did you guys watch the entire debate?
So good.
It was crazy. Did you watch it, Joe?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I was pumping my fist in the air pretty much constantly.
Well, it's one of those things, like before we even get into these clips, we talked about, because this is coming off the heels of something that we talked about a couple weeks ago, which was Chris Cuomo on Patrick Bet-David's show, kind of talking about like, now I'm on ivermectin, and and he's kind of having this, after being fired from CNN, he's kind of trying to dip his toes into like the internet podcasting world and kind of where they are right now. And so Dave Smith ushered out a challenge to him of like, debate me, and PBD made it happen. Right. And it's one of those things where you can't even believe it happened, because so many people tried to get debates going between most of these figures. And it's like the fact that it's all we get is Chris Cuomo, right? Like we don't get Fauci, we don't get Peter Hotez, we don't get any of those guys. It's just, it has to be Chris Cuomo is the one that we get to kind of bully now that we've kind of been more or less right about things, right? It's
I would say more than more or less right, but it was. It was really satisfying.
Give some leeway.
He's humble.
I'm going to give some leeway.
He's a humble guy. Sure. Yeah. Well, I would say it's super satisfying, and that he's the guy, because he was the one in the infamous clip, and it's probably going to be in what we're going to show here. I haven't seen this clip yet, but where he is talking with Don Lemon about shaming people who are taking horse dewormer, ivermectin, blah, 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 and making fun of all of us. We should be shamed. We should be shamed.
Well, and that is exactly the clip that I pulled. Well, and so this will show exactly what Joe's talking about.
Have a look.
But listen, you told me I should apologize. So what do you think I should apologize for? And then I'll tell you what I think you should apologize for.
I know what you think I should apologize for. Obviously, there was so much talk that they don't want you to take ivermectin. Ivermectin is the way to go. Take it. Joe Rogan got better from ivermectin. And by the way, I don't like what people did to Joe Rogan about ivermectin. I don't like
You did it.
No.
You did it.
Yes, you did.
Find the clips.
Dude, find the clips. You shamed Joe Rogan.
Find the clips.
You said he's taking horse dewormer. You and Don Lemon were chuckling at each other about it. I'll go find the clips.
First of all, you just saw the clips.
I'm
not chuckling. I'm listening to Don. But
no. The clip I'm talking about wasn't on there, and it's absolutely there. Here, do we have it? Hold on, let's play the clip.
Injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh my God. What person? You talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin A dewormer? Really?
They are shaming themselves.
That's
no
what
one
it
has
is.
to shame them. They're shaming themselves.
So you're taking a dewormer right now.
This is
Chris,
a
you can't
dewormer.
apologize for that. You weren't being clear that it was this,
right.
and you know that, dude. You're being so dishonest right now, man.
I'm not
You
being
were talking
dishonest.
about ivermectin, the drug. You were not talking about this version of ivermectin. Come on,
I
man.
was responding to a situation where we were told that this is what people were searching out to take, and nobody knew what it was going to do to them. Look, I'm taking the drug right now. Obviously, I don't think it's all poison. I stopped calling it the horse drug when, and you can not like it, CNN's chief medical officer, who is Sanjay Gupta, said to me, you shouldn't just call it a horse dewormer. There's a whole legitimate aspect of the drug. I wouldn't use it for COVID-19, but it's not just the veterinary grade. So I stopped calling it that.
So, okay.
And then it went away.
By the way, I don't know if you guys saw this. One of the best moments during the pandemic was when Dr. Gupta, who was just mentioned, went on Joe Rogan's podcast. For all the days of CNN like demonizing Joe Rogan, they send their top doctor out there onto his show, and he goes, why is everyone on your network saying I'm taking horse dewormer? Ivermectin's not. And Dr. Gupta looked down at his lap and went, yeah, no, they shouldn't be saying that.
You know what is really interesting about this to me is that people were seeking out the horse dewormer. Why? Because it was made unavailable. Okay, members of my family were prescribed ivermectin prophylactically or in some way around COVID because it was showing efficacy, and they were denied by their pharmacy to even pick it up. They had it there. They would not give it to them. And this was broadly across the country. So they weren't allowing people to take the human medicine. So people were going to whatever lengths they had to find whatever they could. Broadly speaking, I don't think most people were taking horse dewormer. And certainly Joe Rogan, who's worth like hundreds of millions of dollars, was not fucking taking horse dewormer. That's fucking ludicrous.
But that's what shows you that it's about narrative formation. It's about creating a mono-narrative. It's not about truth, right? It's not about actually what's going to be best for people. Or in case of Cuomo, right? You're saying people are taking horse dewormer. And so they're operating on the meme of that.
Right.
Not on, is that a real thing and why has that happened? They have no curiosity whatsoever about why that's happening. Because it's not about that. It's about the meme and the narrative.
Well, and it's about reinforcing the fact that the only way out of this mess is the jab.
Right.
Period.
Right. And they needed that for all kinds of reasons,
Well,
right? They needed that for the emotional satisfaction of we were right, you see, and they got to close those doorways off. And then not to mention the financial incentive.
They also needed it to justify the emergency use authorization. If there was another widely available known therapeutic for COVID, they could not get that passed. It had to be the only way that it was possible to beat COVID.
And that might be one of the things that I think the types on our side that emphasized how great the vaccine was in the sense of that it got developed very quickly, that's like a wonder of science, that they're missing out on because that was dependent upon the manipulation of the public through lies. And that's a problem when your government lies to you to force you in a particular direction. And it just so happens to have enriched a bunch of people centered around the guy who made the virus happen in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's so crazy about it.
That's insane.
Well, and also remember around the narrative formation, just to enhance that meme that you're talking about, Dave, they painted Joe Rogan green. Yeah. Remember
it made him look like an orc. Right?
It looks like your shirt, Dave.
Yeah, it was like that.
Wear some color, you know? You guys are just so dour.
You must have...
summertime,
You're colorblind. You must have picked that out this morning going, I'm going to wear gray today.
Yes.
Just teasing.
Yeah.
Just teasing, Dave.
That debate got 1.3 million views on YouTube. The PBD debate between Chris Cuomo
and that's just
Dave
on
Smith.
YouTube.
That's huge.
I mean, just the clips from it.
Oh yeah,
are crazy.
Well, this
too,
is another 800,000 views. There's a ton of those kind of clips. Obviously, Liam got 50,000. Holy cow, buddy!
Liam is crushing the game, guys.
Yeah.
Do you think lockdowns worked? Oh God, let's watch it. We gotta watch it. Did lockdowns work? I got it.
Yeah. So this is another one, and I think it'll spark some good conversation because there's a lot of conversation about the second and third order effects of lockdowns here. Not necessarily just like, okay, the problems of locking people down in the moment, but what does that cause down the road, right? And that's the thing that people often don't look at is what are the externalities and the things that the domino effect of we do this, what does this mean 20 years from now, right? And that's something that people often don't really think about, and I think this is a good clip that talks about that.
again, we can look at the data. You can put the data up. I mean, this is what I do. But what I'm saying is this.
Data?
He's just a man of
this is what I do too, with a much better track record, Chris. I'm just being honest. This is the truth.
I don't know that you have a better track record. I really don't know that you have a better track record.
Okay, so let me ask you this.
Right.
Do you think lockdowns worked? Did they cause more harm than good? By the way, there was no good that was caused, but do you think they caused more harm than good?
The correct answer is you can look again. I wish these things were that simple. Okay. I can argue yes. I can argue no. The government will say yes.
No, but I'm asking you.
The people who are in charge of the field will say yes.
Do you think that lockdowns mitigated the virus and were not offset by the catastrophic harm that lockdowns caused?
That's a different question. And that's hard to know. It caused so much pain in this country that it's hard to say. How do you value what they believe was saved in terms of lives?
Go look at the Johns Hopkins study on lockdowns. They looked at all the lockdown areas versus the areas that didn't lock down. They found no difference in mitigating the virus. It was just the disaster. And I was against the lockdowns from the very beginning. I was against the ridiculous outdoor mask wearing. I was against all of the mandates, all of people being deemed non-essential, all of this stuff.
I get it. But it wasn't just America. You make it sound like, you know.
I'm against it everywhere.
But what I'm saying is, but it matters that it happened everywhere. It matters, and it happened in other places longer. And yeah, look at Sweden. How did it work out for them?
Great. Wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
Sweden, by the way, here's how it worked out for Sweden. Lowest excess mortality rate in all of Europe. That's how it worked out for Sweden.
They had rates of illness in there.
Yes.
And then they didn't build up the herd immunity they thought they were going to by going that way.
Okay,
and the UK wound up watching them and reversing course.
And why is it that Sweden has the lowest excess mortality rate in all of Europe? Because of all of the deaths that were caused by the lockdowns. That's why. They were the ones who didn't do that to themselves. And man, I mean, you look at, Pat brought up the number of small businesses that were ruined during the lockdowns. That's the least of it. And that's huge. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. But you're talking about suicides, families breaking up, children falling behind, just things that people will never, and not just that, but also just, look, here's the thing, right? And this is what I think the media class never really grapples with. If I were to ask you, what was the cost of the war in Iraq? Okay? What was the cost of it? Now, you might try to find what you go, okay, we spent $2 trillion on the war in Iraq. Okay, there were 1 million Iraqis died as a result of that war. Over 10 million were displaced. You could look at the thousands of America's bravest young boys who killed themselves, tens of thousands, if you want to count the ones who blew their brains out in the aftermath of it. Okay? But then you know what the cost of it was? Everything that we're living through today in our country. Donald Trump being president, the lack of trust in the corporate media, the culture war, everyone being pitted. Like, these things have costs for your society down the road that are impossible to measure. And the costs of the lockdowns, it's going to be another 15, 20 years before we look back and really recognize it. By the way, one of the costs of the lockdowns was the Summer of Love. The riots that caused billions of dollars in property damage across you remember the fiery but peaceful riots of 2020?
Yeah, I was in them.
There was,
I was in them.
That was a cost of it. I mean, those riots didn't just come out of, it wasn't just a coincidence that they came on the heels of 3 months of lockdowns. Anyway, I'm just saying.
Yeah, we'll stop it there.
So this is one of those things that, if there was an honest debate and you said, if it was 2018, right, and you kind of said, well, okay, we have a really important public debate we're going on right now, is do you want to be China or do you want to be Sweden, America? These are your choices. We can either continue on the path that we've been for almost a century of being like Sweden and doing focused protection, protecting people who, if there is some crazy pandemic in the future, that we're going to have a very specific policy to only protect the people who are infected and keep them from infecting other people, right?
Makes sense.
And especially focusing on people who are statistically likely in the event of that, whatever that is. If it's children, keep the children safe. If it's old people, keep the old people safe. Or do you want to be like China, which is an authoritarian regime that locks everyone down, and that's their whole strategy that they're going to do in the next pandemic? We didn't debate any of that. We debated that in the halls of the White House, behind closed doors. The Bush administration put in a policy that says we're going to go China's route because that's the new way to do it. That's the way more effective next way to do it. And then we'll develop vaccines. We'll do all that stuff.
So this policy was actually established long before the pandemic?
In response to 9/11.
Why was pandemic policy made in response to 9/11?
Because they thought the next attack was going to be a bioweapon.
Huh.
And then we funded a bioweapon. We've created the bioweapon, released it on ourselves.
Oh, so they just thought that the next attack was going to be a bioweapon.
No, I'm not saying it's a plan. It doesn't mean that they planned it.
Oh,
but that's just so. I mean, that just shows you how incompetent the government is, right?
Joe's like the pre-programming.
All I'm saying is,
I mean, you remember anthrax, right?
What? Oh, sure.
Anthrax, right?
Yeah.
So like all these people receive. We still don't know why that happened. Have no clue.
All the
we never
anthrax being
caught
mailed.
who sent the anthrax round. But what that caused was a huge anthrax response in the government. They vaccinated a bunch of people who got sick from the vaccines on anthrax. That's a whole story. Glenn Greenwald did an awesome thing covering that. My whole point is there could have been a debate, and there was a debate. That debate happened on the Sohor Forum in what year? When was it? I was actually just looking it up. What was it? June 1st. Newt Witowski came in and said exactly that. We didn't have to do this. We could have done it, and this is not going to work. He predicted the first and second waves that Chris Cuomo talks about and how they became less lethal and more infectious over time. He predicted all of that in June of 2020, and yet you still had people locking down all the way until November, right? And that just shows you, right, that there were alternative models that were just as legit. There was 100 years of Western experience in dealing with pandemics that said, this newfangled Chinese way of doing it isn't necessary, isn't tested, isn't proven. There's no reason to believe it's going to work other than that it makes government feel like they're doing something very important and big, and it gives them the moral authority to do it. It gives them a moral justification.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, speaking of morals here, I think there's a really stark contrast. We pointed out Chris Cuomo's trying to make this bridge from mainstream media to the independent media, right? He signed some kind of contract with PBD,
he's
Valuetainment.
He's still with News Nation, but he does like contributing work or something.
Yeah, and he's he's got like one leg in both worlds. So it seems like he's kind of trying to like preserve his old, groups. He wants to be able to say, I did my best when he's rubbing elbows at the cocktail party. But he's never going to make it in independent media, ever, because the number one currency, and Dave Smith talks about this all the time, the number one currency of independent media is truth. Mm-hmm. Everything is on the internet. You can see an entire Twitter history, an entire YouTube archive of someone's opinions across time. And I think the perfect dichotomy to illustrate this of what is really going to engender faith and trust in a media personality versus distrust is Chris Cuomo really is only building distrust by not acknowledging the fact that he was wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
His refusal to apologize.
His refusal to apologize was completely unfounded, and he got his whole shit torn apart by Dave Smith here. The example on the other side is Tucker Carlson, who supported the invasion of Iraq when that happened and was very vocal about that, and on his platforms on Fox or CNN, wherever he was at that time, who has since come out afterwards and said, look, I found some new information. I went to Iraq. I talked to generals. I was dismayed by what I saw and learned. I was wrong, and I feel terribly about that. Mm-hmm. And he has built a lot of trust up with someone like myself, who was never a Tucker Carlson viewer in the past. In fact, I was sort of skeptical of my parents watching him on Fox News. I was like, oh, this guy's just another talking head. But after hearing him acknowledge the fact that he made some mistakes and he owns those, I have so much more trust for him, and I'm willing to follow him down the rabbit hole on stuff that he's discovering because I think that he's acting in good faith. And Chris Cuomo is just absolutely not acting in good faith.
That's the thing, and PBD kind of alluded to this in that debate, because there was this whole thing about Chris like not wanting to apologize because he wasn't wrong at the time, kind of it. Like he's trying to do these mental gymnastics there, but like Chris Cuomo could theoretically make this like kind of comeback story moment, because he's trying to hold on to those connections that he has in the past, and you kind of feel that with him, or it's like he's not exactly with them, so he's kind of making enemies with them while trying to maintain his relationships, while then trying to build relationships in this new space while not really kind of going with them and kind of embracing their culture. And there's like this weird dichotomy that he finds himself in right now, where he could take the route of being like, I was one of those guys in the corporate press, and here's all the problems that I see with the corporate press. And like, I kind of regret some of the things that I did at the time, but you're part of the culture and you're with it. But now I'm kind of in here and I'm kind of making my own space as this center left guy. And like he could do that and probably garner a bunch of attention, but instead he kind of tries to get the best of both worlds. And because he's trying to compromise in that best of both worlds situation, he's
getting nothing.
Yeah, he's getting nothing from
He's getting
it.
nothing. Yeah.
Totally agree. It was surprising how much of the debate was just about whether or not he should apologize. Right? And then his argument case was, well, Trump doesn't apologize, so I don't have to, which is a coward's way of dealing with a fact, right? Of dealing with the problem.
Yeah.
Very true.
Well, there's a certain element too of like his family, because like his brother was the lockdown governor, and his brother also got ousted, and like they both got fired, technically around the same time of each other. And I think there's something with that family dynamic that exists too, where they're like, they have to kind of defend each other. And, he's stuck in a weird zone right now.
Yeah. There's certainly a prideful egotism that surrounds this whole situation for him in whatever way that means, if it's familial or otherwise.
And that demonstrates the difference too, though. Like he actually tries to ascribe to Tucker that he, was manipulated by that Tucker actually reduces his own accountability to supporting the war on Iraq by saying he was manipulated by Fox News. And Tucker never says that. Tucker says, no, I really thought it was. I was writing the stuff that said Hiroshima was a great idea. I was doing all this, and then I was wrong. And that inability for Cuomo to even tell the difference between what he's doing and what Tucker is doing is really telling about how he orientates to it. And he can kind of generate I'm confused and lost in the fog kind of internal psyche that justifies it forever, right? You can play that game forever if you're willing to deceive to that degree that you can just say, well, I don't know, it was complicated at the time and I never have to apologize, never having the humility to do that. And once again, that's childlike.
Oh, exactly.
Kids do it that way.
To that point, I think that it's very clear that Chris Cuomo is still living in the past where the mainstream media is the singular arbiter of truth. And all of these clips where we can go and verify what Tucker Carlson said back in the day, is available to everyone on the internet. He's just not, he seems to be oblivious or is trying to just imagine the fact that he's still in that world where he's not going to be held accountable because no one can find out the truth.
Right.
I was listening to Dave Smith's recap episode on his podcast of the debate, and there was something that struck me where he was saying that Dave Smith was just kind of like hanging out in the green room for an hour beforehand. And he thought that he was going to end up having to spend like an hour with Chris before the debate, but it didn't happen. Chris kind of just showed up right before it all started. And he was like sitting there thinking about the game plan. Like, am I going to be nice to this guy? Am I not going to be nice to this guy? Like, cause he is kind of the enemy. Like I do kind of got to take him down for the sake of like our culture. Right.
Yeah.
But he said when he first met Chris, like 5 minutes before the debate, Chris came in and he just seemed really down. Like, it's like Chris said he went and watched 19 hours of Dave Smith before this to prepare himself. Like he even listened to the Legion of Skanks before, right? Like, which is hilarious.
And he tried to take down Dave on having a
Could you believe?
show.
Yeah.
Whatever. Man.
But he said that Chris came in and he was low energy. It seemed like he almost felt defeated and like he knew what he was walking into at this moment. Like when he signed up for the debate, he was like, oh, I'm going to take down this ridiculous comedian guy. But then he went and actually like listened to Dave Smith and it's like, he just knew what he's like, I'm in for a wrong time right now. Right?
Well, and I mean, I think that to Dave's credit, I think he probably saw that coming because in all of the media that he did leading up to this, he was like, everybody chill. We don't want to overblow how badly I'm going to ruin Chris Cuomo's life because I want him to show up. And, kudos to him for showing up because especially after watching 19 hours of it, knowing, okay, this is going to be bad. He could have backed out.
And it's important to see this as a battle between two cultures, right? You have like the insider DC media elite culture versus a culture on the internet that, who's really done the yeoman's work on this space. Obviously articulating the public, Dave Smith, but on like the intellectual side of that is the people on, from Newt on to Tom Woods to folks like that have been building this case in the background who aren't as big as Dave Smith, but are, they have their own audiences and Dave Smith's part of their audience, right? So it's like building that side that changes the culture there and emphasizing that culture. Why people say, oh, why are the people that I trust wrong right now? Well, it's because they're listening to the wrong people. And so start listening to the right people and you can be right too on the next thing. Because we're not done yet, kids.
Right.
There's going to be a next thing. In fact, there's probably going to be a next thing here in the next few months.
I'm talking about bird flu?
It might be a pandemic. It could be something completely different.
Okay.
Well, apparently
like
bird flu is coming out of Mexico is what I'm hearing, right?
That's not the only thing coming out of Mexico, but we'll get there.
Wow, we're here.
No. I think there's one thing I want to put a bow on this, and I think it's really important because we've had a lot of conversations about COVID amnesty, right? Like this come up a lot lately. We've been re-adjudicating it with debates like this one and others. it's going to be interesting to see how we can navigate this dynamic of actually trying to put our arm around the people who did get fooled by this propaganda campaign, the most well-funded and globally pervasive propaganda campaign that I think has ever been perpetrated. How do we welcome those people in to say, hey, look, it's okay. You got fooled by trillions of dollars of media and everyone you should trust or think you can trust lying to you. We want you to make different decisions next time. We welcome you. We can't just say that the people that perpetrated this are innocent and we're not going to try to get some sort of reconciliation for that, however that might happen. But we need to try to welcome the people into the camp so that we do have a more fortified position to resist the next one when it comes.
And I think my maxim of individualized justice is probably really applicable here, right? The more we are low resolution about who did what and holding them responsible to what an individual did versus what just participating, the closer we are to justice, the more we're firmly grounded in righteousness in our anger, right?
Yeah.
If we just say, well, you didn't have the right instincts at one juncture and you didn't, say the right things publicly at the right time.
You didn't listen to Alex Jones.
Yeah,
obviously.
right. Then you're not trustworthy on anything going forward. That would be a mistake, right? So there's somewhere in there between where we can say there is a maximum amount of accountability for Fauci and for the people who are actually Chris Cuomo and people like that, that we are there to stick them to the wall on this forever. As long as it takes. I don't care how long it takes. 100 years. They could be their grandchildren. Be like, well, do you disqualify? Like that should matter, right?
Yeah.
The same way many other, terrible things of the past. Like we should never have forgiven the people who committed Vietnam on us, who lied to the American people, said, this is the most important thing. And then we said, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like 5 years afterwards. Right.
Yeah.
They were still in positions of power.
And if we have a world left, we need to hold the people accountable who are pushing NATO closer and closer to World War III with
Iraq
Russia.
war now, right? Like those people should be disqualified for what they did.
Yes.
We fail at that because we're too easily forgiving of those people who really made the difference.
Well, and also the apparatuses within the deep state resist it so vehemently because it is a direct attack on them.
Yeah.
They have no interest in letting these things happen through DOJ.
And there's no accountability as long as the public doesn't care, right? As the public can be distracted and let off by dangly keychains in another direction, then there won't be.
Right.
And we can't get the transformation we need as a country to actually understand. And part of that too is we have to develop the mental models of how it could have been different.
Right.
Right. And that's a hard mental exercise for the average person to take on. So you just need to create cultural products around that share a different vision of how it could have been better.
Well, yeah, and there's a question of for the people that got duped by it, right? And the question of bringing them into the tent. The biggest question to me is how much of a culture shift have you made since then, and how much skepticism do you have towards the current thing, because there's always going to be people that they kind of just buy into the current thing, and then they kind of adapt 3 years later or something like that, and then they're like, no, the information changed. I just didn't realize the information was, nobody could have gotten it right because none of the information was there. It was like, well, a bunch of people got it right. And that was actually one of the things about this debate of Chris Cuomo was just kind of like, well, Dave, you and your people you're just doing guesswork, right? It's like, no, there's plenty of studies, and just all those people got censored, right? At the time,
removed from their positions of authority. Tenure at hospitals, long storied careers, very well respected people got completely removed from those positions over their.
Well, and remember,
their
this time period
views.
is when all the blanket bannings were happening across all social media networks. That's when I got banned, is in that time frame. It's the late 2020 to early 2021 range, and it's probably for a variety of reasons, not just COVID stuff. It's probably just a bunch of things, right? Yeah. But so the biggest question for me with determining my allies is, what degree of skepticism do you have towards the current thing? Whatever the current thing is, the current narrative, that is the thing that I'm most interested in. And it's not even necessarily do we agree on XY policy, right? It's what is your where is your mental model when the new thing happens? Right. And are you able to kind of treat those things at arm's length and sit back and reassess everything and not just adapt and not just absorb whatever is trying to be fed to you.
Right. Well, if you're a listener or a viewer of this show, you are certainly holding a lot of mainstream media narratives at arm's length, hopefully. And if you know of anybody who is close, they're on the fringe, they're maybe not super politically involved, but you feel like they're open and receptive to stuff, share the show with your friends who might be close, because we want to make this thing a bigger movement. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com.
Well, so Mexico elects its first female president, super progressive. Yes, nice.
Climate scientists.
Yeah.
Right.
Saving the earth.
But everything around the situation is very strange. A lot of conspiracy theories online. Some may or may not be accurate. Who knows, really? But Claudia Sheinbaum was elected the country's first female president after a bloody election campaign that saw 37 candidates assassinated.
And it is so strange just to see that all in one sentence there.
So
right, like it's such. You know what I mean? Like there's something weird about that.
Break
you
it
see
down.
the way it's covered.
What's weird about it?
First, before that, I want to clarify something. This article kind of misrepresents this right now. There wasn't 37 candidates in the presidential election, because I'm seeing a lot of people think that. And there was like 1,000 positions across all of Mexico, or thousands of positions across all of Mexico, and 37 candidates across various positions in like mayoral candidates for like Mexico City and like things like that. They were assassinated. It's not that everybody was running for president and then she got it.
All
right?
of her opposition were just murked.
This was like really a two-person race. There was two main people in this race. Neither of them got assassinated. Right.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's an important clarification on how people are kind of treating this story right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So like, for example, of those 37, like at least one, I actually hadn't seen this. It's in the notes here, Kyle. Is the accidents. Yeah. Do you want to look at that real quick? I bring it up real quick. This is a post Barbaro Naval.
And this isn't even actually considered one of the assassinations. This is just a random happenstance that happened. So there was around 50 people that were confirmed injured, with 9 dead at a campaign event, and this was actually a few weeks ago, where people were sitting on this stage. Here, let me pull this up, and they were talking, yada yada. And the stage came down.
Oh, the stage collapses on
him.
Yeah,
the stage collapsed on him. And
not the way you think.
Oh,
like
no.
This, which is and that's way bigger than you think it is too. Like,
ooh.
Go to the other view, and it shows like the entire, like, next one down, actually in the same thread, Kyle.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, geez. Oh, geez.
Yeah, look at that thing. It's huge. Like, how does it collapse that way, of all ways, too?
Well, it looks very windy.
Yeah, like a windy thing.
Yeah.
This is with some experience in event production and rigging. This is a rigging stage crew's worst nightmare. And these things happen very rarely, but occasionally they do, and they've happened in the U.S. as well. Absolutely tragic.
Well, and it's also like, so that was an accident.
Yeah.
I'm assuming
somebody cut the guy wires on it.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe like, I don't know. There could be more to it than that. But also, like, I watched a video yesterday of a mayoral candidate of Mexico City. It was shot on an iPhone, and he was just at a campaign rally. And there was a guy like basically as close as me to Dave, which is just a few feet, and he's just filming with an iPhone. And the mayoral candidate is going around shaking hands, talking to people, and all of a sudden you just see in the frame of the iPhone a pistol come in and just pop him right in the back of the head.
What?
Yeah.
Don't think it's crazy like that right after telling me that story.
No, but it was like it was just like, whoa, what just happened? Like it was everything seemed all happy, and then all of a sudden pop.
Okay, so who is perpetrating all of these assassinations, or whatever you call it, murders? I guess.
And there's also 11 kidnappings. There's like many threats.
I mean, my assumption is it's the cartels, right?
There's 828 non-lethal attacks that happened throughout this as well. So it's not just the 37 assassinations, all right?
So let's break this down. Who's doing it, and what are there any clues as to what their motivations are?
It's a narco cartel state. right?
So are these candidates that are generally opposed to the aims of the cartel? They're trying to clean up corruption or something, and then they're getting taken out?
Joe Rogan's response to this was, well, we have a neighbor and they're a crack house.
It's a crack house that's on fire.
Yeah.
It's really kind of what it is.
Kind of distills it. Well, it's very strange, right? I don't know. This is more Kyle's story than mine, but it is strange watching how it's been covered is like, wow, this really great progressive thing happened. And then all these, what I was saying earlier about it being very strange to read it, is all the things underneath it of just how broken Mexico is right now and just how terrifying the political situation is there. I mean, whether or not this woman's a good idea or a bad idea, I mean, she's a social democrat, left-wing populist type. She's a climate scientist, which is and not a Catholic and not fitting a lot of demographics you'd expect out of.
Yeah, she's secular Jewish and going against her opponent that she beat out was also a female. So like both of these were two women candidates going for the first female president of Mexico, who was like a Native American Mexican, right?
Oh, sure.
Who was like deep Catholic, kind of center right populist type of person too. So like you end up having this like populist left versus populist right, secular versus religious.
Do you know what the margin in the election was? Do we know how close
I don't know what
the race was?
But to complete the thought there, it was just that it's a very strange, chaotic situation for this person to come out of as a continuation of the guy that was there before her, whom she was probably more socially progressive on. And that would be strange, right? Because they're both kind of left-wing economically, but he was more right-wing socially and she's more left-wing socially, right? Yeah. So, and like, how much does that matter in Mexico? That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe that's de-emphasized there.
Well, that's important to know is the history here is Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the previous president. Presidents only get one term of 6 years. So he very much revolutionized a lot of Mexico towards a socialist economic ends. He's kind of known for that as being the social democrat, left-wing populist type. And she is just kind of continuing that legacy in a lot of ways, but now including more of like woke, LGBT, those types of things included in the messaging, right? So much so that actually, probably worth bringing this up. Yesterday, there were protests against Pride Month at a government institution.
They're tearing a pride flag apart. It looks like.
Yeah, and you see, these are workers' revolt at a government institution in Mexico City, saying the only flag is our national flag. So they're tearing down a pride flag, right?
It's like obviously a very religious country. And so it's kind of like, is the interpretation here, there's kind of like a forcing here of a more left-wing social vision from someone who...
It reminds me of Ireland in a lot of ways.
They either didn't vote for it knowing that she had that position, right? Or it was well vetted and debated? That's another question.
Well, I mean... I was just scanning through like comment sections across Mexican Twitter, essentially. And the general sentiment that I'm seeing from Mexicans, and I would like to actually it'd be interesting to actually speak with someone from Mexico to give more of a perspective, because this is like there's a keyhole bias that exists here. Yeah, right. Yeah. Where I'm seeing a lot of people is like, nobody I know voted for her. It's all cartel rigged elections. It's all like that's the narrative that I'm seeing everywhere, right? But that's just coming from,
Well, the margin was quite wide, as it turns out. Scheinbaum won with 59.4% to 27.9% to the next closest candidate. The third place candidate had about 10%. So certainly a fairly handy victory. I don't know if, that's a pretty broad margin to coerce, I suppose, from a population. But again, I don't know what the dynamics are.
Yeah,
I would suggest that there's a lot of people online are suggesting just because she's woke and left-wing and there's like that seems to match up with their current biases against the intel community, that this is therefore like an intel operation. Maybe, but it's not a sufficient amount of evidence. But there is a lot of strangeness here when you look at the sheer amount of violence, the sheer amount of chaos, the connections that the intel agencies have had with cartels.
Well, it is also just Mexico is a cartel state, right? Like that is kind of the nature of it. Well, and we're going to get to El Salvador later, but there's a difference there that exists of like, Bukele, they're cleaning up the cartels who essentially were the government before he came in, and then Mexico, who is essentially run by the cartels, right?
Well, and I mean, looking at the incentives around it, I think our border policy certainly creates a lot of economic incentive for the cartels to be able to engage in all manner of trafficking, human, drug, otherwise. I mean, I would actually like to, if we could, take a slight detour into immigration policy here. There's a big debate going on right now, particularly within the libertarian world, which I've been really keyed into since the LNC, around open borders versus closed borders. And there's good, like, libertarian philosophical arguments on both sides. David, am I mischaracterizing your position that you have historically been like pro open borders, or do you feel differently than that?
I kind of agree with Kyle that the words here just kind of mislead more than they help.
Yeah.
So to me, okay, so you have your principles and you have your evidence, right? What is the evidence of the best border policy the United States has had to reduce illegal immigration and maximize, a border that's controlled, right? Has obviously the Bracero program. Bracero program? Am I pronouncing it wrong? Bracero program, which was a effort in the 1960s and 70s to lower immigration barriers for legal immigration while investing in border security simultaneously. Is that an open border position or a closed border position?
I mean, I would say it's closed in the sense that we have some insight and control over who enters the country and who doesn't.
Yeah. So
I would agree. It leans more in that direction.
Yeah. So like, I don't think that's what people, if you were to say that policy to an open borders person, most of them say, oh yeah.
They
it's
agree
way
with
better
it.
in our current system.
They agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But people are trapped by the magic words.
Yeah.
Right.
Way
situation.
Open borders means anyone come and go as you please with no vetting whatsoever.
But okay, so in that sense, there's actually less vetting in the sense that the highly bureaucratic, very expensive process that we currently have is a vetting. And it shouldn't be. Right. That's the ridiculous.
Well,
if you lower that barrier, it means you're doing less vetting in that sense. And to me, that's not vetting, right? Vetting should be a very narrow set of categories, like, are you a criminal? Do you have a active disease right now? Right?
Do you have
bird flu?
Yeah. Do you have bird flu? Yeah,
well, do you have the means of supporting yourself with like a gainful employment, or are you coming in to live off of the welfare state?
Are you somebody that's just going to leech?
But and then this is one of those other like challenges, right? Is that the actual problem in immigration or not? Are we emphasizing something that's not a problem in order to justify a regulatory state that has more to do with protecting the wages of union workers than it does with an actual sensible immigration policy where you can get the security you want? Right? Because if you want the security, what you want to do is de-emphasize the black market. And the best way to do that is to make it affordable and easy for people who do want to cooperate and come here legally to come here legally.
And who are not criminals.
Because otherwise you create the incentive to come here illegally.
Right. But do you also need to couple that with actual border security, unlike what we currently have?
Sure, but I mean, this is also another problem. That's if you change it in a vacuum. If you change it alongside drug war, if you change it alongside welfare reform, you change it alongside all these other things, maybe you don't even need to do the increased border security cost because you no longer have all the economic incentive.
I agree, and I think that that's a perfect example of the libertarian utopian vision of like getting rid of the welfare state and all of those things. That is not the practicality of the situation we find ourselves in.
It kind of goes into what we were talking about earlier with that, where like there's a lot of my problems with a certain segment of libertarians on this issue right now is they kind of operate in this like world that we're not currently living in when they're talking about their hypotheticals and then putting forward like kind of their policy prescriptions that exist. And it's like, yeah, I agree with kind of like the end goals there, but there's certain political realities that exist right now where we can't quite mesh those together in the moment.
Yeah.
And there's also a problem of nation states, and like immigration is used as a tool of warfare in a sense. Like there's kind of like a Cold War tool like thing that happens there, right?
Well,
like there's all these problems that like it's a multivariable problem.
Completely. And a huge variable that we've talked about a few times on this show is our foreign policy. When we go and wage wars around the world, we drive refugees out of their home countries and into other ones. And, the United States is known as a place of economic prosperity and freedom. So, of course, it's going to be a bit of a magnet, particularly when these folks know that they can come in and they can pay a cartel however much money to traffic them across the border very, very easily. So until we're changing that, I don't think an open borders policy makes any sense.
Well, and also a closed border policy doesn't make any sense, right? If what a closed border means is we're just going to spend more on security and then kick people out of the country who are here. Right, like if you're just investing there, but you don't invest in what de-emphasizes the black market and actually goes after the actual economic incentive to immigrate here illegally for a lot of the immigrants who do come here as workers, then you're gonna have the same problem.
Yeah, but I look at it a little bit differently, like phased at least, right? Like, okay, a patient comes into the ER with a gunshot wound. First, you have to stop the bleeding, and then you can do surgery to clean up the broken tissue and repair it and make it better.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's a situation in this country right now where a lot of people feel like we need to stop the bleeding.
Yeah, well,
first.
that visualizes all immigrants as a lump sum, and that's not a good way to look at it.
Of course not. But in terms of just not knowing who's coming across the border and having,
but once again, like, as long as you keep, like, and I'm on your side here. I'm trying to say, if you want to know who's coming across the border, you have to lower. If it takes 10 years and $50,000 to immigrate here legally, no one's going to immigrate here illegally.
Completely.
So therefore, you might have to address that. And that's the thing that people don't want to hear on that, because and this is also another true. It isn't just South America, right? It's also our relationship to Europe and our relationship to Asia and our relationship to all over the world that makes it very expensive to bring people here who want to be here.
Totally. And I know multiple people personally who are going through that process right now, and it is tremendously arduous. And they're well-educated, gainfully employed entrepreneurs, creative people who are trying to create value for the world that they're living in the United States. These aren't, asylum seekers or refugees of any sort, right? So like letting those people in makes a ton of sense, and lowering the bars and the barriers to becoming a naturalized American citizen does make sense. But I think that the thing that people are really upset about is that we feel completely out of control right now.
Right. Sure. And I understand that feeling, but that's a feeling that was created because we listened to trade unions on labor policy, not because we were trying to secure the border. Right. That was an effort to make sure workers had more, domestic workers had higher wages than they otherwise would. So, and obviously a function of Fed and foreign policy and all these other things. So if you say we can only change one thing and we have to isolate only the one thing we're going to change, and we're going to consider our philosophy in a box that only can change one thing at a time, well, yeah, you're going to run into problems. And I'm not saying we don't spend more money on the border. I'm a realist in that sense. I think the Becerra program is the example in that. Because they couldn't change U.S. foreign policy because they weren't gonna. It was the 1960s and 70s, right? It was the Cold War.
Yeah.
Right. And then welfare policy is very difficult to change. Right. And additionally, that assumes that immigrants.
There's just not a political reality where that's changing in any drastic sense.
Exactly.
Right now.
Well, exactly. And that is the harder part about looking at this holistically. And I agree with you. And I know that we're pretty much on the same side here. We're kind of debating over nuances. But the difficult part is like what we're talking about are deep systemic changes that need to take place in order for that paradigm to work.
And I totally agree. Chase Oliver has been terrible as a messenger on this for the LP because he's emphasizing the wrong things. He's emphasized the same thing Cato does, right? Which is we need to make it easier to immigrate here. And I don't think that's actually the best public message. The best public message is we need to secure the border. The best way to secure the border is to make it harder to immigrate here illegally and easier to immigrate here legally. That's actually Donald Trump's point of view. He said we need a big, beautiful door in the wall. Now, he couldn't accomplish that, in part because he's actually dependent upon the trade vote. Right? Democracy is your biggest problem here, not the ideas.
True. To quote Dave Smith, democracy sucks.
True.
All right. Well, thank you for taking that little detour with me. I think that was worthwhile. And our friend Henri Pellerin, he and I were talking about it earlier in the week.
And he's like, go after David on this.
And
he's wrong.
He wanted some more some updated clarity on your position.
No, that's cool.
Thank you.
I'm very much just to put a bow on that little bit on immigration. I'm very much open to hearing where I'm wrong here. I mean, I'm actually been trying to think a lot about how these European experience with immigration meshes with ours and like how to think about that. Because obviously we're a very different country because we're not an ethno-state, right? Ireland is an ethno-state. So if they say Ireland for the Irish, I'm like, okay, that's what you guys want. Have at it, But what is America? Well, America is kind of a set of ideas, and I'm not interested like in making a racial purity test.
America's
for
a very different country than those other
countries.
Like that's actually probably one of the strangest dynamics of this is us like in the Americas, like North and South America, we're a very different dynamic than what the rest of the world is because we were like this discovered nation where everybody flocked to.
Right.
So like a lot of those types of tests that you might use in Europe just don't really apply here because we are such a
true.
And we see this actually
because of the historical precedents.
We see this in the comments of a lot of stuff. When we talk about our Europe and immigration, we see people saying, hey, look, I'm okay with these guys, but not these guys, because these guys seem to share our values and these guys don't, right? Yeah. Those things do seem to matter. And I can understand that, especially in America's case, right?
Completely.
The thing is that a lot of people simply use melanin content as the entire metric of whether or not someone's a good immigrant or not. And I just Ann Coulter, who did that to Vivek last week.
That's a low resolution way of looking.
I
at it.
agree,
which is just
I
the
agree,
error.
but I also think that you need to be careful the way you're framing a lot of people. I don't think if you look at the collection, she does, but she's not a lot of people, right? She has an influential voice, but I think if we're talking about people who are pro controlled immigration, closed borders in the sense that we don't just let everybody in illegally over the border,
sure.
As a group, there is a small subset of people who just don't like brown people and use border control and security as a way of exercising those feelings, right? I don't think that is the preponderance of people who just want some semblance of say over what's going on, who's coming and going in our country.
I'm saying New York Times bestselling author, very popular podcaster, radio person, TV personality, Ann Coulter.
And reptilian.
Told Vivek to his face that she wouldn't vote for him because he's brown.
100%.
And that is a problem.
Despite her agreeing with his policies the most out of any candidate.
And I'm pointing to that not because I think everyone who disagrees with me on immigration is racist. I'm pointing to that as a feature that this is a thing that you have to contend with.
Yes.
Otherwise, you are doing the same thing the left does, which is just pretend the things I don't like to exist don't exist, right? And it's not true.
I agree.
And so, I'm not saying anyone I know is in that camp of I don't like them because they're brown. Obviously not. But if we just ignore it, we're not going to be able to purge the people who are of that persuasion and shame them into a better position, because that's the only way to deal with that, in my view.
I
don't mean shame, I mean just point out that it's messed up, that it's collectivist, that it's bullshit.
Totally.
Well, it's a low resolution view of trying to profile cultural values.
Yes.
Which frankly, oftentimes it works because people of various of different descents tend to kind of group together, and then they develop certain cultural values because that's just how humans tend to work. I hope that's not racist of me saying that, but people do. But it's not always the case that that's going to be, because the case of the white nationalists, they'll be like, well, Thomas Sowell's fine, right? And you're just yeah, but he's not white, so how is he fine in your worldview? It's well, he's basically Anglo. because he ascribes to the same policy perspectives and cultural values that they subscribe, so they're willing to turn a blind eye to that, right? Where you're well, he's useful for our economic policies,
Well, right, and then it just doesn't make any sense. Where do the Koreans fit in this, right? If you're immigrating from South Korea or Japan, where do they count? Right? I mean, this so silly, right? They were talking about a country that has, less historical connection to the English common law than some other areas in the United States of the world, but is far more grounded in property rights than many places. So why? And we bias towards China, but not South Korea. Come on. Or there's all kinds of unsensible things with that. Obama, you basically put in the policy that became the shithole country policy of Trump. When he put that in order to curb what they thought was going to be an increase in Islamic terrorism due to immigration from those countries, that's okay, fine. That's a proximal for it. You're doing it by country, not by race, right? That doesn't. What to me vetting means the individual's vetted.
Sure, exactly.
Not the vetting is your melanin content or what your eyes look like or what country you're from.
Totally.
Now the country you're from could matter, right? It's a proximal. We should have our eyes absolutely wide open and non-naive about that sort of thing.
Right.
To Kyle's point, but that doesn't. But the problem is that when we engage in the public dialogue on that, the game changes a lot, because now we're dealing with a whole lot of people who are using this as a proximal or are very much comfortable using those proxies for their entire way of orientating to the issue.
Right. Well, and there's an element too, like the average person, they're looking at it and they're like, I don't want Haitian cannibals to come in. Right? I don't want Satanist MS-13 people to come in.
Totally
which is but then when you have the open border thing and you're messaging with the open border, we need broader immigration. It's the average person's looking at that there's fentanyl just coming crazy across the border, right, and MS-13 gangs coming in, and you're you gotta live within the political reality that we're currently in right now, right?
Totally.
It can't be broad open immigration in these times right now.
Right.
That's a very difficult.
In economically prosperous and peaceful times, it's a very different story.
Or with just proper property rights defined within your society.
Absolutely,
like we have so many problems in our society right now that it makes this stuff untenable.
An effective justice system, perhaps, that actually prosecutes criminals for crime, which we obviously don't have in this country.
Like clean streets.
What are you talking about? Donald Trump's got 34 count felonies.
You're right. We got
a good criminal justice system. The thing's working now. I was all for abolishing the police till now. Sorry. We got to pull out of this. It's getting too deep.
Okay, so yeah, we'll move on. So we have a dynamic. We have this dynamic here in Mexico right now, and I think it's an interesting parallel going to El Salvador. We've covered El Salvador quite a few times with Nayib Bukele, and we talked about him getting reelected. And this last week, he got sworn in now, and he got. He got his swearing in ceremony was kind of interesting. Actually, Mike Lee had some interesting things to say about this that I thought we should maybe start this thing off with. Mike Lee thought it's time for us to bring back capes. Strong men create good times is what Nayib Bukele
oh man
tweeted here.
Guys,
look at those capes.
Anybody just listening, find your way to Spotify or YouTube, because these capes, they're worth seeing.
It's
especially
Bukele,
with the AR.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good look.
Yeah. So it's obviously like a ceremonial, like military thing, but the El Salvadorian military has capes. Pretty baller.
And that suit that Bukele is wearing, that jacket's pretty sweet too.
I saw a lot of people saying, yeah, but Hitler wore capes and the Nazis wore capes. And it's like, no, you're not getting it. Capes expand the mimetic energy, and that can be used towards good or bad. Heroes can wear capes and villains can also wear capes, but the mimetic energy is what's important here, and capes just build that.
Oh man,
it's like 13x.
This is why I don't eat vegetables, because Hitler ate vegetables.
Oh, true.
So I don't eat vegetables, making me the opposite of Hitler.
This is why I'm not in the occult, because Hitler was in the occult. See, sometimes it works.
That's why I stopped breathing air, because Hitler breathed air, and there.
But yeah, no, it's. Yeah, he got sworn in, and that was just fun. I like it's time to bring back capes, because I kind of imagine Donald Trump in a cape. You know?
I'm sorry.
Put that in Mid-Journey right now.
Imagine Joe Biden in a cape. He'd have something to wipe his ass with.
This is.
I bet you I get a ban prompt for trying that.
Biden.
Stand by.
Yeah, you're probably gonna have to make a prompt
Donald
like orange
Trump
man wearing cape. You know?
Orange man.
No, what you got to do on Midjourney is you got to bring in a picture of him as reference, but not actually name him.
I don't know how to do that.
And then you use a character reference.
I'm not a big enough nerd to know how to do that.
I'm just a master of Midjourney. You know how it is.
Oh, I know how to do it. I figured it out.
But yeah, so there's some interesting things here with Nayib Bukele that I want to dig into. The first that was kind of interesting here was he tore down a communist statue and melted it into a manhole cover.
Nice.
Which I think there's just like an interesting dialogue here. Is like, we've been tearing down a lot of statues lately in our country too.
Just of the founding fathers, none of Marx.
Yeah. But
how many communist statues do we have though?
Oh, whoops. Here, let me. That
was violent sounding.
Let me do it just slight volume.
There we go.
Yeah, so they tore it down. They're melting it down.
This cinematography is awesome. Look at that.
Look at that.
Oh wow. That's great. It's like a montage of turning this epic statue into
I don't know what this is a reference to, this communist statue. Like, I don't really know what it is.
Why is it communist? It kind of looks like a Gaia reference.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it makes it communist, but apparently it was a communist statue. But what I actually want to get into is Bukele had some interesting comments with Tucker Carlson this week. Bukele invited a bunch of people from various delegations, like Donald Trump Jr. went to this, Tucker Carlson went to this, Javier Milei went to this. It's kind of a big delegation of those types that came in.
Cool to be watch him and Milei talk. It'd be pretty wild.
It would be very interesting. I'm sure they had some interesting dialogue there. But he had some interesting comments here on the rise and fall of the West that I thought might be interesting for us to kind of dig into here.
Western civilization, because civilizations go like this.
Yes.
So Western civilization reached the peak. I cannot point exactly where the peak is. It's like timing the market, right?
Yes.
I'm going to buy in the bottom and I'm going to sell at the top. Nobody can do that, right? And so I don't know exactly where was the peak, but we can all agree that we're in the decline.
Yes.
So that is happening because we're not giving the correct maintenance to the civilization. Why what made the West the leader in the world at the time we're living right now? What caused that to happen? A lot of things, like, importing the scientific process, started, developing science.
Yes.
Focusing, putting a lot of money into art, into science, into trying to build the best things and then, as fastest and as best and as great as possible. And, importing wisdom and technology and trying to develop new technology and trying to, but suddenly, when you get wealthy, happens with families too.
Yes, it does.
Then people probably get spoiled, or they get, I want more things. I want that. I want this. You have to provide me that. And politicians. The problem. I mean, democracy is great, right? The U.S. has proven that democracy can work. But the problem with democracy, because everything has pros and cons. The problem with democracy is that politicians have a great incentive to offer. To give away the treasury.
Yes.
So if I say, no, I'm going to keep the treasury, it's because we might need it, for an emergency or something. Nobody would like that. People would like, oh, I'm going to give away the treasury. So they would vote for him. Then another politician, you know what, I'm going to give the treasury plus another treasury. So we're going to go into debt, right? Everybody will say, great, let's receive more money from the treasury. And when I say treasury, I mean, anything, building stuff, giving free stuff, sending checks to people.
COVID relief.
Yeah, exactly. Getting, a stimulus, whatever. So the politicians have the incentives of, just giving away the treasury and entering huge amounts of debt. And that.
Nice. It's so cool to watch them articulate so well. Exactly the cultural moment, America. Oh, I like that Donald Trump in a cape. Yeah.
We got one. Donald Trump wearing a cape. It's sort of interesting how it hangs off his suit, but Midjourney did its
Pretty
best.
Batman-like. Yeah.
Quite.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull up Biden wearing a cape, but it's not liking it as much.
I'll make a better one for a thumbnail.
There you go. There you go.
We want to do that. But if you're watching, or if you're listening, we managed to get a image of Donald Trump in a black cape.
Yeah, perfect. So is the West falling because we're wealthy and rich and we've entered the time where weak men make hard times? Is that the case? Is that true?
This is essentially the Ray Dalio argument in his book, The Rise. What is it called? The Rise and Fall of the West. Ray Dalio, big investor, hedge fund guy. But this is essentially the case. He basically just looks at it with market trends, and he sees the rise and up of China and the rise and fall of and he, like, the image of itself is just kind of like bell curve, and then like the next bell curve is like, and they're reaching a meeting point.
Yeah, Spanish Empire, right, British Empire, American Empire, and now that's the China. Now, one of the things I like this is the certain amount of, one of the things I don't like about this is a certain amount of like imperial predestination kind of view of the world. That there's an inevitability to these sorts of things, which could be true, but it definitely seems to de-emphasize human action and maximize like a history, like a rule of history that usually to me it seems like the wrong way to approach it because the data points are so small.
Well, the pattern, the idea is so big. It's more so the pattern recognition and just understanding human behavior and incentives, right? Like, all he's saying here is you end up getting this point where you have some sort of like massive ideal that kind of shapes the collective of your society into a particular direction. It has all the incentives aligned to move people towards a golden era because it elevates strong people, it elevates creative people, it elevates all this stuff. And how people put those incentives in place is different depending on the societies. Right. But then eventually you get a point where the society shifts and the incentives shift because they've reached this pinnacle moment. And then they just start like, well, let's just make sure everybody has their welfare. Let's make sure everybody has, and it's kind of like, it's usually often a compassionate thing, right? And you move towards this thing where, well, we got this massive treasury. Let's just start handing it out. Let's give free bread. That's what happened in Rome. Let's give free bread. They start just giving free bread out to everybody, right? And and that's just like an example of and then the incentives continue and continue and continue, and then you just keep going further and further into debt because of all this stuff. And we're still living high on the hog. We still have all this power across the world, you know, and we can kind of make this prolong for a long period of time. But all the incentives here in our democratic system is like every 4 years somebody has to get elected.
Yeah, if you
every
read
2 years, somebody has to get
Ron Paul's Revolution, he says like it's the same thing, right? But he puts it more from like an imperial foreign policy kind of point of view, that Caesar crosses the Rubicon that ends the Republic. And the crossing the Rubicon to Ron Paul was probably, you know, the moment we decided to just not throttle down after World War II. We basically said, you know, we're a global empire now. We have to fight the Soviets, and whoever wins this wins the world forever. And then we articulated that with all kinds of philosophies about why that was necessary. We continue to justify it today. That's why we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. That's why we decided to make Nicaragua into a basket case for 50 years. The Sandinistas, our policies across the Middle East, policies in Southeast Asia. Each of these things are justified in this giant way that we're continuing to pursue even today with our imperial ambitions across the world. And at some point, that just runs the treasury dry, and you have to print money to make it happen and cross inflation, and that will be the end of the empire. He was predicting that in 2008.
Ron Paul was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you get that sense that, okay, so that's the other side of that, the counterfactual. We've been talking about how we're at the peak of the empire since the 1980s. Right.
True. Yeah, there have been all sorts of
empires tend to take a long time to actually fall.
That's
right?
part of the problem. Is that's so big.
Well, that's the thing. Is because we moved, and you know, maybe our crossing the Rubicon moment was maybe JFK assassination, right? Like Ron Paul puts that as the transition of when our government changed. Like we were one way, and then we were another way, and that was kind of like the massive symbolic moment and the coup that happened that changed our government into the next stage, right? And that might be one way to look at it.
Yeah, might be. I think it's totally like it's a way that people can hear, and the meme of it, the sense of it, the narrative of it makes sense if you are familiar with American foreign policy beyond what you're told in your 8th grade civics class.
Well, and to me, it's like you can't really save the empire unless you change the incentives, because the incentives are your destiny. And if your incentives are all pushing you into a specific direction, and the incentives themselves incentivize you to continue going down that direction. Yeah. Like that is the inevitability aspect. That is the destiny.
It's so people criticize that as slippery slope argument. And there's a fallacy in slippery slope arguments. That said, it's actually an incentive argument, which is actually the exact same point that Hayek makes in The Road to Serfdom. Is that there's a certain set of incentives that power creates, and it perpetuates itself. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. You can see that across all kinds of evidence. The question is, are we there now, or are we at some other place? How will AI and how will these other things change that incentive? How will cryptocurrency, does it ever actually place a check on the dollar?
Slow down the fall
or increase them, right? It's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, and that's because like when we're just talking about incentives right now, look at all of the handouts that we have to dish out, and also look that we're $30 trillion in debt. Like, you're not changing Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Right. Those are things that are untouchable politically speaking right now. And as much as you want to change them, it's not happening.
Yeah. They'll change. Right? They'll change in like 2070. Yeah. Right. When it's paying back
when it collapses
60 cents on the dollar. Right. Yeah.
But like if you can't tackle those, our descent continues going down. But anybody that tries to touch those, they're ousted from society. Right. They're ousted from political talk. You can't touch those. Right. But so the incentive is we have to leave those in place because voters matter, and voters select our politicians, and those politicians decide, are we going to change those? Well, they need to go with the voters. Like, this is one of the problems with democracy, is that it just becomes like, well, the mob needs this. We've dangled the carrot in front of them, and if we don't keep giving them carrots, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah, we'll turn on you. Yeah. So the thing is, so why does Bukele have to be the one to articulate this for it to make sense?
Well, that's the interesting thing about Bukele, and also guys like Javier Milei, and also just all of these nations right now. Like there's an interesting dynamic that occurs here where there's like a resistance against the old ways, and it's like we're having these new nations who used to be kind of very poor, very impoverished countries. They're making massive strides very quickly. Well, the empire feels to be in decline right now, right? It's like we have these new places that seem to be propping up of like, oh, there's actually order in their country. They're reducing crime. There's actually there's kind of the quality of life is rapidly expanding. The wealth in those countries are expanding.
They've solved inflation.
Yeah, like they're solving these things in real time. Well, all of these other places that are like the first world countries, everything feels, and we all get the sense that they're degrading right now. And the degrade might be slow, but we all feel it kind of deeper.
There's a coming apart sensation since I don't know what time, but there is one.
Is there a paradox here that, like, some of these countries like El Salvador and Argentina, they have sort of these libertarian ethos of like increasing freedom and prosperity and quality of life, reducing inflation and all those things. Is there a paradox that it's sort of taking a little bit of authoritarianism on the part of Nayib Bukele to just like throw all gang members in jail and like, and sweeping up some innocent people along the way towards that? Is there a paradox with the means by which we're achieving what seem to be goals that are a little bit more liberty oriented?
And maybe this is overly utilitarian of me, but quality of life is better in the country right now. Yeah,
in El Salvador or Argentina, probably.
It's just flat out measure. They went from being the highest crime capital of the world to being one of the lowest crime rates in like 6 years. Right?
Would the United States potentially support similar measures if we knew, okay, we were going to get positive outcomes as a result of that?
Well, we're not in the same spot though. Yeah. That's one of the things. Like, our crime is getting worse, but our crime is still lower now than it was in the 1960s and 70s.
Their government was run by gangs.
Right.
Like that's the important thing.
Arguably, so is ours. They're just called 3-letter agencies.
And I am a Rothbardian in that sense, where it is just a criminal organization or a mafia that we've like put a religion around, right?
We just codified it.
But especially when we're looking at Mexico, right? Like however Joe Rogan clarified it, of it's just a drug den, like just that's on fire right now, just south of us, right? Like that was El Salvador too, right? And the next clip I want to show here from Bukele is also in that same Tucker Carlson interview this week, of him talking about what MS-13, the gang, actually is like, right? Because I think a lot of people don't realize kind of the elements of the ritualistic practices that these people do. And I think it would kind of shock people to be aware of what goes on with these people. Because also, I want to remind people of back when the Haiti story happened, when we had barbecue, warlord barbecue going around eating people, right?
Yep.
Bukele tweeted out saying that we saw the same type of things here in El Salvador.
Really?
And we were watching gang leaders bathing in the blood of their victims, surrounded by their skulls.
Wow.
Right? like these are the things that we're talking about. So like when I hear libertarians being like, he might be too tough on crime, you're like,
see, I feel like that's something
okay,
that, like,
man.
I feel like that's something that Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly would do too, though. They're into that sort of stuff. Let's watch the clip.
MS-13 is one of the major gangs.
And they are satanic also.
That was my question. So very
I'm
little.
sorry.
No, but I hope you will explain it, because very little has been written in the West about this.
They're satanic, yes.
But actually, literally, can you explain?
Well, they didn't start as a satanic organization. MS-13 started in Los Angeles, in the U.S., because Salvadorans weren't allowed to sell drugs by the Mexican gangs. So they created a gang that was called the 18th Street Gang, because they basically wanted to sell drugs in a street that was 18th Street over there. But then division started they started dividing themselves and started infighting. So they created the MS-13. And then MS-13 started outgrowing the other gangs, and they started exporting the organization to other parts of the U.S. And when Bill Clinton decided to deport those guys, he didn't tell our government at the time, I'm deporting this criminal. They just send them here. And they came, there were few, but unchecked. At the same time, some laws were passed to protect minors from imprisonment. And of course, the gangs used that to recruit 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. So at the beginning it was, some youth causing harm, assaulting, trying to control their territory, selling drugs, things that are bad, but probably not critical. But they grew, and they started controlling territories. A few years later, they were actually a huge international criminal organization that they have bases in Italy, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the U.S. basically, a lot of major cities in the U.S. will have strongholds of.
Right outside Washington, D.C.
Yes, of course. And you have in Long Island and
Yes.
in L.A. It's a huge criminal international organization. So they grew and they started, killing more people just to get territory or to fight against rival gangs or to, collect debts or, money or whatever. But as the organization grew, they became satanic. They started doing satanic rituals. I don't know exactly when that started, but it was well documented.
Yes.
And in our arrest, we've even found authors and things like that.
Yes, I've seen them.
And so they became a satanic organization. And even when you, sometimes when you interview gang members that are in prison, they would say, I'm out of the gang. Of course, they're in prison, but they would say, I'm not a member of the gang anymore. And when they asked them why, I remember I remember the news outlet that made it this, but it's a very well-known news outlet that made this interview with a gang member in person. We allowed them to go into prisons and do the interviews. And the guy that they asked him, how many people have you killed? And he said, I don't remember. He didn't remember how many, probably 10, 20, he didn't remember. And then they asked him, and what is your position in the gang? He explained how he went up in positions, but I left the gang. I said, why did you left the gang? And he said, well, because I was used to kill people, but I killed for territory. I killed to collect money. I killed for extortion. But I came to to this house, and they were about to kill a baby. And the killer that had killed tens of people, said, "Oh, wait, what are we doing? Why are we going to kill that baby?" And they told him, because the beast asked for a baby, so we have to give him a baby. So
the beast.
Wow.
The beast.
The beast. Yeah, because they're straight up Satanists, right?
That is crazy and terrifying.
Yeah, so I think that's a worthy perspective of understanding what these Central American governments are having to deal with, right? And
because of American drug policy. Mm-hmm. That's our part of the interesting part there that I always hang on to, is that origin story. Really, it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. It matters. American drug policy and immigration policy and all these other things are having these huge collateral consequences in El Salvador that have put them in a situation where the gangs run their prisons, so that in order to break that, they have to control their prisons first, and then they have to put away a lot of people very quickly, because you can't. The longer you wait, the more process you have, the more danger someone innocent dies. It actually inverts the process that we usually think of, right?
Right.
So that's the sense in which I can understand the justification of, we're going to be somewhat crude and just say, you have an association, it's too close, it meets this threshold, I'm sorry, you're going to prison until we can sort things out. When you're in a situation where the gangs control your prisons, you might have to change that calculus. And not to mention, if you're something so terrifying that you're willing to kill a baby in service of your religion.
Satan. Let's just
Satan.
Be very clear.
Well, and there's also an element here, like he says in the Tucker Carlson interview, that we've arrested this number of gang members, and we've also we've been lenient with the people that are associates to the gang members, because you have a lot of people that are like the woman that owns the shop that is kind of the front for it, but if she exposed the gangs, she'd be killed, raped, etc. Right? So and we're lenient on those types, the people that are associates. So they are having discrimination when it comes to that, right? Which is important, because I think everybody's just looking at it from a lens outside of just being like, he's just cleaning up everybody, And it's like, no, just don't be so surface level. This is so much more complex than that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard when your only look into it is sort of like, I don't know, maybe Twitter or like a mainstream media source. There's not a lot of granularity to the story. It is very low resolution.
Well, and a lot of Americans are like, but their prisons are so they don't have TVs in them.
How could they?
Like,
it's inhumane.
Christ. It's like, oh my God.
No, and it's not that there's something wrong with a more humane prison. I mean, the Europeans deal with their prisoners very differently than we do here, and very differently than they do there. And we can meet that with interest and curiosity, and like, I want to know the context in which that's how it works. Or you can meet that with, well, CNN said this guy's the bad guy because he is putting all these people in prison and all, et cetera, no civil rights, that sort of thing. And you're like, I get that criticism, but then you want to hold that at a distance until you actually know something about the topic. You know, and that's the problem with the mainstream press, is that you're really trusting them to custodially hold all that trust, all that context, and give you exactly what you need to know in those 13 seconds, and that makes you very vulnerable to manipulation, because they just hold out that they won't tell you that the gangs actually ran the prisons. And in the prison, he says in this interview that the prisons had conjugal visits hosted by, you know, the prison the gang that ran the prison. Like, they literally wouldn't let the government in to their own prison, because that's how much they ran their prison.
That's insane.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Because if you could buy off all the guards, is it a prison anymore?
It's a country club.
Well, and that's just the frustrating thing around this entire dynamic to me, is just you have the people like, and Bukele himself says, like, okay, you're comparing us to American prisons. Now compare us to other Central American and South American prisons. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite good compared to that.
Yeah, that's a more apples to apples comparison, right? Yeah, for sure.
Right. And don't get me wrong, like, if he could get to, and you know, him and his predecessors in 20 years get to a place where they have excellent civil rights track record, they've lower gang violence, and they have a humane prison system that rehabilitates people and doesn't just punish people, that would be a good thing. Yeah. But they are so far from that now. Like you just have to actually contextualize the moment. And actually understand it, not to see him as a boogeyman. And some people want him to be that just because his stuff with Bitcoin, and then he kind of got popular on the stuff with Bitcoin.
The IMF really doesn't like him.
Yeah, and then you do have to ask the question: why do people need to hate this guy?
Right. Well, the narrative around it, to add a little bit more context to that for folks that might not know, is that he made Bitcoin legal tender in his country, like one of his first things, which is huge within the cryptocurrency world. And then, of course, the backlash to that was all the International Monetary Fund and similar, you know, organizations were very much opposed to that, because that means he's sort of deprioritizing dollarization in the country and their hegemony over the monetary system.
And we're talking NGO-sponsored protests against him, talking about Bitcoin evil and trying to educate people on how evil Bitcoin is, right? Like, I watched protests of this where the imagery looks like there's this massive groundswell of protests, but then you'll see pictures from people like in buildings from a distance looking at the protests with cameras.
It's like 25 people.
Less than that. Just like holding big signs. Yeah. And, you know, there's just like some sham reporter, you know, covering it, and it looks like it's this big thing. But everything's the angle. Everything's propaganda, right? And like this is the thing that you got to remember when you're looking at all of these things. Like, are you supposed to hate that person or not? Like, always have a degree of skepticism of what you're seeing on a screen, because somebody's trying to put a narrative forward here. And somebody or some groups or people or international interests or intelligence communities or whatever this is, they have a big gripe with this guy in El Salvador, right? And like, why is that? That's an important question to ask.
It is very much so.
I think his point on taxes and things like that, like some of his internal messaging on these sort of things, he actually had a really great, like, you know, how to think about government's role when it comes to infrastructure and like what to do that actually, and especially, can you build something as a civilization and where they're at on that. That was, to me, an interesting moment of comparison of where he's at to where we're at. Like, they're in a moment of, we can do something, we can build something, we can get there. And while we're like, can we build a train? Is that possible without spending $1 trillion? Like, is that, you know, those sorts of
he was talking about the train in California where they built 600 meters for
like $12 billion or something like that.
Yeah, it was like 15, I think. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. Where you're just like, okay, something's wrong. Like, America used to be at a point where they could build the Empire State Building in a year, and now they're at a point where
and I want to make
$15 billion on a train.
I want to make a point. It's like there's two levels of resolution that are both valid in that. One of it is your cultural energy, and you kind of made that point really well just a minute ago. The other one is your formal institutions that literally exist to inhibit those energies because you've decided to place other things more important. We've said, unless you spend $1 million on environmental study to build 10 feet you're not going anywhere, right? You have to appease all these things. You have to do decades of work to do one thing. We can't build the Empire State Building in a year now. Why? MEPA. Because Nixon put in MEPA, right?
What is that?
That's the Montana Environmental Protection Act, but that's the state level, and then you have the federal level, which sits on top. You got to appease both these masters, and they don't even necessarily like have the same
frameworks or priorities.
Yeah, right. They don't necessarily actually file on one piece of paperwork. You're legally liable to both simultaneously. Like these, so each one of these levels actually are what inhibit this. That is the crucial role of freedom in generating the energy, right? You need the energy to live in a state of freedom, and you need energy to get back to a state of freedom once you've left it. And like that's that cultural thing, that white culture is the thing that you need to emphasize. You need a culture that celebrates beauty and energy and forwardness, right?
Well, and why
as
we're
opposed
in such
to preservation.
Right. And why we're in such a terrible state, I think, is at least in part due to the fact that like this bureaucratic state has become such a blood-sucking parasite on that energy of this country that literally it's depriving us of the energy that we need to return to that state.
But the delusion of the libertarians and the conservatives in this, and they think if you just get rid of the formal state with some election cycle that you'll win, right? And that's not how it works. It actually works the other way around. You have to generate a energy that then justifies the freedom you're going into, if that makes sense. I'm having a hard time actually articulating this, but it's a very abstract thing.
I mean, it's the simple Breitbart quote. Andrew Breitbart is the politics is downstream from culture. Like that's all that he's saying right there, is that you need that cultural energy and then the politics come afterwards. But if you can't get that cultural energy, the policy stuff, like, it might be like short-term gains that exist here or there that you get, but like it's not going to create the long-term lasting effects of having a people that actually believe in something, around this, right? Well, and I'm actually reminded from this conversation on the cultural end is I saw a clip last night from Peter Thiel. He was giving a speech and he was making a point of like, why is it that all of our entrepreneurs and all of our startup culture is like all run by people with Asperger's? And he was saying that actually says something deeply profound about your society of why is it only the not neurodivergent people are the ones that are doing like startups and progressing things forward. That tells you something about your society where it's weird to be that person, and your society should be trying to promote startup culture, right? It should be promoting people that push the envelope forward. But instead, those people are the ones that are like shamed. Oh, you're doing something weird. Oh, you're going to fail at that. You're going to do this. And like that's a profoundly like deep problem with our culture right now of like shaming people that are trying to do things interesting and they might fail, right? Like or trying to keep them from doing things and just trying to go with the flow, fit in the box properly, right?
Well, and I mean, but I think it's an interesting point that you make there, that it's like those are like good risks. Those are healthy risks that we need to make as a society in order to progress into a place of greater prosperity for everybody. Meanwhile, those same entities that are kind of demonizing that healthy risk taking are going to promote unhealthy risk taking in so many other ways. Sort of the degenerate side of our culture.
Well, and our society is kind of at this point right now where most people or a lot of people feel like a lot of people just feel like no matter how much I work, I'm just not getting ahead, right? That's a cultural problem that exists, right? That exists. And then there's a lot of people too that are kind of like, I'm going to gamble my way out of this, right? And that's kind of the degen culture that exists, right? With like stock market phenomenon, a lot of things in crypto, right? It's not necessarily about the innovation; it's about meme coin go up, right?
Right.
And that's a symptom of where we're at right now.
And the third one is I'm going to go move out to the countryside and I'm going to bunker. That's the other.
Yeah, which is so huge right now. I mean, I think like the revival of the homesteading ethos, that people are just like so attracted to that idea because they see all of the degeneracy that's going on in society, and they're like, I don't know what I can do to fix it, so I'm just going to insulate myself and the people I care about from its ill effects.
Right. There's the commune kind of re-impulse that we've had since the 1970s, kind of rising again, and then there's the more family-based, conservative-based. Yeah. So, and part of the question I think is what to do to change that. And I do like his point here on the illusions of like dropping the illusion of these things and kind of pointing to them so that people can, get reality-based vision of how these things actually work.
This clip, and we'll probably bring this whole conversation to a close with this clip, is it's a throwback to him speaking at CPAC a few months ago, and I thought it was kind of relevant to this overall topic.
When I talk to my conservative friends right here, they always tell me that the problem is high taxes, but they're wrong. The real problem is not the high taxes themselves, but the fact that they are not even really funding the government. Not even those high taxes, higher than a lot of places in the world, not even those taxes are really funding the government. So who's financing the government? Government is financed by treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print the limited amounts of money out of thin air, why do they collect taxes? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not.
Yep.
When I talk to my conservative...
That's exactly it.
Wonderfully said.
Couldn't say it better. On that note, friends, I think that's a great place to end. We are going to go to our members-only show right now. If you are not a member, we encourage you to join us. We really appreciate all the folks that are supporting us financially. HumanReactionPod.com to find out all the ways you can engage with us on Substack, on YouTube, get into our Discord, and all of those things. Links in the show notes below. For my colleagues, David Rand, Kyle Mack, Bennett, who is gallivanting around Northern Europe. My name is Joe Sheehan. This is Human Reaction. Thanks so much for watching.
Peace.